Michael Goldman, and Pleasanton Council member Julie Testa, and Cupertino Mayor Stephen Shaw, and Palo Alto City Council member Lydia Koo. Thank you all for being here and helping us, understand, untangle, what's going on in Sacramento. I'm sure, you all have spent, enormous amount of time trying to untangle this, and just you are here to educate us. I really appreciate it. I would like to introduce, our moderator, Rahul Vasant. Rahul. So thanks for volunteering to moderate this event today. I also would like to make a request, right? So. Community groups like Better Cupertino and Livable California and Palo Altans for sensible zoning, they make these kind of events possible for us, right? So if you want to donate, there are QR codes at the back, so please feel free to use the QR codes to donate to any one of these community organizations that are helping us organize these kind of events. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Rahul Vasant. Rahul.
Thanks, Muni. Thank you, Muni. I believe the first thing we're going to do right now is get started off with a set of presentations from our elected officials. And yeah, I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to this. I can say there's nothing I'd rather be doing right now on a Saturday than discussing housing. And so who's gonna be the first one?
Susan.
Great. Okay, we've got Susan Kirsch, the founder of Livable California.
Okay, so the volume is okay if I'm speaking right here without being any closer to the microphone? Yes, is this good? Okay, and I've got slides to go up there, and just as the slides are coming up, I'll say, like, I just drove like an hour and a half to come here to be with you to talk about housing, and so, as a way to spend the Saturday afternoon, thank you. And look at all of us coming out because we care so much about our communities and about what's happening in our communities, and if ever there were a time that we need to be alert to what's going on in Sacramento, it seems like every year gets a little bit worse than the previous year. We're all here looking at that question, do you know what Sacramento is planning for your neighborhood? And we've started to get a glimpse of many of you do know what is planned for your neighborhood. And if you go to the next slide, please, this is the handout that you had a chance to pick up when you came in. Like, this is not a pretty picture, either as a slide changer. What do I do? Forward, back, okay. Great, thank you. So even with this being an illustration, and you've probably all seen like maybe the report that Palo Alto did from the Embarcadero Institute on what it looks like in terms of how many tall buildings will be put in around your small cottages or in your historic or neighborhoods with quality of life that you want to preserve. So a part of what started Livable California, I've got two slides I think about Livable California, is what we recognized about a year ago, is how many little communities or medium-sized communities, even the big cities, were getting clobbered by the kind of legislation that was passing through Sacramento it's not new this year, it's been happening every year, and every year the intensity of what they're planning to do to take away local control gets a little bit worse. So, Livable California, we're working with the theme, working smarter, not just harder, by the fact that we collaborate together. We're basically a coalition of elected officials, many sitting at the table here today, and neighborhood community leaders and homeowner association leaders or tenant right groups leaders, so a broad mix. Let's see, we believe basically government closest to the people serves the people best, and that what we have is this push for decision-making moving further and further away to regional agencies or what we're getting from Sacramento in the top-down legislation that a senator like Scott Wiener is pushing very hard. So let's see, next slide. If you've paid any attention to the news, you know how often the language of what we're facing is called a housing crisis. And it's a little like the childhood story of Chicken Little, the sky is falling, we've got to do something, we've got to act quickly. Of course, we have a housing problem, and it is especially a housing affordability problem. And so what we're saying is that the real crisis that is emerging is not just a housing crisis, it is this crisis that there is a corporate land grab or a developer giveaway that is made possible by bills that we're facing that are replacing the authority of democratically elected officials like the ones at this table representing local constituents like you in the audience, and is being replaced with profit-driven businesses, corporate businesses who are doing housing, and investors not with local recipients or local constituents, but with distant shareholders. So we're setting out to change the narrative, to really look at what the real crisis is. I'm going to just summarize this slide because I know I don't have much time left to say Sacramento is basically taking an adversarial, top-down, use punishment to get their way approach. Within your own communities and in livable California, we know how often you work collaboratively on design, pulling together general plans and housing elements and other aspects of what has made your cities work. When Sacramento looks at the causes of the housing problem, they're often blaming the cities, saying the cities haven't done enough, so they've got to change zoning regulations, or they're blaming environmental CEQA reports and the environmental constraints, saying that those have to be overcome. As was pointed out, Livable California is an agreement that many city councils have approved excessive commercial space without provisions for a workforce. Businesses aren't paying their fair share, and we haven't had enough funding once we lost redevelopment funds to keep providing funding for affordable housing. But whoever made the comment about Google, you're going to love this slide. This is what Mountain View would look like if Google were providing enough housing in these 40 and 50-foot towers with no space bigger than 800 square feet, if they were providing for their workforce within their own footprint. And look at this statistic at the top from 2017, and I apologize, this should say 482 cities, not 300. The combined revenue for the cities in 2017 was $77.5 billion. Google, single one company revenue was $110 billion. We need to be looking at how businesses are being called on to pay their fair share. So let's see, I think proposed solutions, I'll just summarize this quickly and then the rest of my slides I'll use later. Sacramento wants to put the decisions in the hands of developers to make decisions. They believe in building as if more supply will increase the supply of affordable housing, which research is showing is not true. So we've got some ideas about that, and you'll hear from other speakers with ideas as well. So thank you. So Raul, who's next?
We've got council member from Sunnyvale, Michael Goldman.
Okay, and I have some slides. I have some slides also. I'm head of Livable Sunnyvale's extensive Livable California's extensive R&D department. We believe that we're actually a couple of old guys with spreadsheets. So as soon as my slides come up, my job is to change the narrative. The narrative is.
I think you need to hold it.
The narrative has been so far that everyone wants to walk to work. They don't, especially the young people, don't care about single-family homes. That's old people stuff. And if only we, the city councils, would allow high-rise apartments everywhere, then everyone could walk to work. the environment would be saved, greenhouse gases would disappear, and that's what we should do. And it's only a stick in the mud NIMBYs that are stopping that. Okay, well, first of all, what does SB 50 do? It applies to job-rich communities. Okay, oh, that sounds like Palo Alto, sure. San Francisco, sure. Merced, well, the definition of job-rich is more jobs than the surrounding area. Merced has more jobs than the surrounding farms, yes. So it's job-rich. School areas with positive outcomes. Anyone know someone who says, whose principal says, my school is not a good school? Right, so it includes every city with a good school, which is every city, and every area, actually. So if you think you're going to escape SB 50 by going down to San Luis Obispo, or up the coast to Eureka, forget it. That's a job-rich city because it's got more jobs than the surrounding area, and the schools are better for positive outcomes. That's the definition, positive outcomes. You know a school with negative outcomes? Neither do I. So, okay, and transit stops, by the way, because we're all going to take a bus to work. By the way, just before coming here, I looked up what it would take to get from my place, which is right here at Fremont High School, to East Palo Alto, where a lot of tech places are coming up. By driving at 8 a.m. on Monday, it would take me about 16 to 30 minutes. By bus, it would take me an hour and 40 minutes. Okay, so this is what it would not allow. And this was done for Palo Alto. And there's one half parking space for each unit. So 2 people, 2 wage earners, and one apartment, and you get one half parking space. I'm almost encouraging, I almost want this to pass because it is so stupid that I just, I can't talk anyone into this. I've talked to the UMDs types, and it's like, whoa. And these are smart people, by the way. They have PhDs in physics and engineering from MIT and Stanford and all. But their belief system overwhelms all of it, and they think this will work. And all we have to do is get one, and everyone, and we will see, okay, no one's taking the bus, because, hey, it's too slow. Okay, this, everyone thinks, oh, tremendous growth in Silicon Valley, we must accommodate. I'm going like, what growth? What are we talking about? From 2000, the country as a whole, urban areas grew 21%. There's Minneapolis, St. Paul, 21%, standard. Okay, Los Angeles, City of Angels, La La Land, all that exciting Santa Monica, Surf City, 8%. That's nothing. You know, compared to the rest of the country, that's a shrink of 15%, 14%. Cincinnati grew more. Cincinnati's the butt of all the jokes. You know, blah, 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 Cincinnati. You know, this is the metro area, right? Not the city itself, because people are moving to the suburbs. They've been moving to the suburbs since the Industrial Revolution. Suburb comes from ancient Rome, ancient Latin, because people didn't like the crowded city. They went suburbis murae, the suburbs. San Francisco, San Jose, tremendous growth. Google, Facebook, you know the crowd. Grew to 15%, almost as much as Kansas City, Missouri. Whoa, okay. You know, people move here for the weather, right? That's why Minneapolis, St. Paul grew almost twice as much as LA. Almost 3 times as much. Okay. Most cities are affordable. We're talking about a couple of cities that are not, but of the 300 largest metro areas, over almost 90% are affordable to the people with the median income, and a lot of over 50%, over 60 are affordable to the 80%. Okay, why is housing so expensive? Because some people can afford it. Not me, but some people. Because if Apple's making $1.9 million revenue per employee, they don't care about money. They don't actually make anything. They design it. Some Chinese guys make it. Same with Facebook and Google and all the others. They don't care. I have talked to them, and I say, it's costing you money, it's costing us money. They don't care. They simply don't. Is there a shortage? If there's a shortage of something, price will go up. If the price goes up, does that mean there's a shortage? No. A Lexus 500 costs $93,000. Get all you want. Buy 10 if you want. There's no shortage of them. It just costs a lot. What do people want? 50%. And this is, by the way, for the Urban Land Institute, which really wants to believe that everyone wants to live in pack-and-set apartments. 50% say they want to live in rural or small towns, rural areas or small towns. There's 14% live in big cities, and a couple of, only 12% actually want to. The others would just assume be the heck out of it, but they got to do what they got to do. If given a choice, you have to choose. Would you rather live in a single-family home and drive? That's the red bar, or live in an apartment condo and walk? That's the blue bar. And the Urban Land Institute keeps asking this, hoping they'll get the answer they want, which is everyone wants to live in a condo, and they don't get it. It's about 50-50. Some will say, okay, I hate driving, so I'll live in a condo, and the others say, I don't care. I want a single-family house in a small suburban community like Pleasanton. So let's look at Palo Alto. If you can afford Palo Alto, you can afford anywhere, okay? And so what are they doing in Palo Alto? Everyone walks to work? Well, no. 6% are commuting over 50 miles. That's 2002. 8% of the workers are commuting 50 miles in from Gilroy. Palo Alto, that's 2002. 2015, 14 years later, it's increased. 6% from Palo Alto to Gilroy or whatever. Now it's 8%. So you build more housing, you put in more industry, and you get more and more of what we got. You keep on doing what you're doing, you're getting more, keep on getting what you're getting. It's not gonna, so how is this compared? We're actually kind of averagey, not exactly on the high end of averagey. Tampa, St. Petersburg is a little more super commuters than we have. Dallas has a few less, 12% instead of 14%. LA actually is 10%, because most people commute by time, and LA is so congested, it takes, you're just not gonna do 50 miles, it takes forever. But we're kind of an average big metro area, so like deal with it, you know. This is affordability. We're kind of in the middle. Affordability is really high in recessions, like the Great Recession, boy, houses were cheap. Not so high in bubbles, not so very low affordability in bubbles, like the housing bubble, liar's loans and all that stuff. Dot-com bubble burst, you can see the drop. We're sort of in the middle, so where's the housing crisis? Well, the housing crisis is young millennials who've not seen a recession because they graduated after 2012, when the recession was pretty much over, and they think, I want to live in San Francisco and I can't afford it. I can't live in the Champs-Élysées either. That doesn't mean much. So is this where we're going to go? It could be. My job is not to tell you what's good or what's bad. My job, I feel, is to say, you make choices. We all make choices. And if you keep on making the choices we're making, we'll keep on getting what we're getting. So there are solutions. One is you build these companies enough for the transit they're causing, enough for the housing displacement they're causing, to make it incentivize them to get the hell out of here and expand in Sacramento and Riverside, which are actually growing, do have lots of buildable land, and people actually like to live. Sacramento's nice, I've been there, it's nice. Anyway, so here we go, thanks.
Next, we've got Mayor of Cupertino, Stephen Sharp.
Putting in my where's the clicker? 1 minute, please. Great. Okay, first I would like to make it clear that I am not speaking on behalf of the City of Cupertino or the City Council. These are things I've prepared myself and my own views and beliefs. So I'm going to start talking about housing. Oh, there's that. So I want to first talk about housing in Cupertino and RENA. There's been a lot of criticism of various cities, including Cupertino. Why aren't you building enough housing? Our RENA number was 1,064. We entitled 1,400. One development got an extra 8 units, the senior housing at Veranda, which is going to open very soon. However, that senior housing at Veranda is the only entitlement we gave out where the developer has actually built the housing. There's 4 others where they are not building for various reasons. So I did talk to one of these developers recently who owns the property near Apple called the Hamptons, and said, hey, we gave you 600 more units. You can go from 343 to 943. Why aren't you building? And when will you build? And there were a lot of reasons they gave, and some were reasonable. They said they fear a recession. Construction labor is too expensive. There's a shortage of construction workers. Materials are too expensive because of the president's tariffs on imported materials. They think that our mitigation fees for traffic, etc., are too high. They don't want to pay the community benefits that they agreed to, which are $7 million for our civic center, primarily our library program room. Then it got worse. They said they don't like inclusionary housing because they said the BMR units end up with more domestic violence, more drunk and disorderly, too many people and too many cars. They said they prefer paying the in lieu fees, and then the city would take that money and go build inclusionary housing on their own, which, as many of us know, those fees are just way too low to actually buy land and build sufficient housing. And that's why we have the density bonus, where the developer includes the inclusionary housing in their new development. Now these were all done before the Palmer fix, so they have about 10% below market rate. And by the way, the market rate is not forever. There's a time limit after which it expires, and it can go back from BMR up to market rate. Now this is the from LAFCO. I can't remember what LAFCO stands for. It's a county agency.
Formation Committee.
Local Agency Formation Committee. And this is from 2016, so it's a little out of date, but this is the jobs housing balance that LAFCO has. And I took out cities like Monte Sereno and Saratoga, which don't have many jobs, so they were kind of irrelevant. So Cupertino and Sunnyvale are around very close, 1.07, 1.08. San Jose, because they have so much housing and not a tremendous amount of industry, is the best at 0.89, although since it's such a big place, their allocation is higher. Now this was interesting. It was in the Mercury News last week, and I'll read it. It says, on Tuesday, Sam Liccardo, the mayor, said he was aghast to find that the city last year granted planning permits for fewer than 200 units, a step before issuing a permit, signaling there aren't many homes waiting to be built. He may have been aghast, but we've known this for a long time, and we're aghast, but we've been aghast for quite a while. And we would love to find a way to get developers with entitlements to actually build, just like the mayor of San Jose. But then it got worse. He said that they should consider temporarily reducing mitigation fees and taxes for high-rise apartments and exempting them from 15% low-income units. So this is just worsening the affordable housing crisis, and as Susan pointed out, that's what we really have. If you've got tons of money, there are plenty of empty places to rent or buy. But if you're low income, you're in real trouble in this valley and in the Bay Area. And that's why we're trying to get more BMR units built, both by having an inclusionary requirement and by funding exclusionary projects like the Veranda, which are 100% affordable for seniors. So I talked about this earlier. I won't go through it again. This is the project that isn't being built right next to Apple's new spaceship campus. So I was talking to some people, and as you know, Cupertino gets attacked a lot. I got attacked. I made a joke during my State of the City, which of course got taken out of context, and I will not repeat it here. We have entitled 140% of our RENA. And personally, I think RENA is a great idea. Do fair allocations, tell the cities what they're required to do, but you need something else that says, once someone takes an entitlement, hey, you have got to build in a reasonable amount of time. You cannot just sit on that forever. So who knows what this logo, this is the old Apple logo, which I found, because I kind of like this one. And we get attacked a lot about Apple. So this was where the spaceship is now. This is before the spaceship was there. It wasn't an apricot orchard, although I was told before it was HB it was an apricot orchard, but it's not now. In fact, now there's actually more trees because Apple planted a great many trees. So I just want to get away from the idea that all of a sudden we went from an empty piece of land to 13,000 jobs on that site. Because what really happened was HP slowly depopulated that site. At the peak they had 9,800. In 2010 when they left, they said it was 60% capacity, so I calculated they had 5,900. Now, but Apple, they didn't run out and hire 13,000 new people for the spaceship. They don't hire that many people. It takes them years to hire that many. They transferred them from other buildings, some in Cupertino, some in Sunnyvale, and other cities. And they added some new employees, service workers, food service, maintenance, security. So this narrative that gets repeated endlessly by some big city mayors, you know, Cupertino's terrible. They added 13,000 new jobs at Apple and didn't build any housing. It's just not true, but they're endlessly repeating it because someone's telling them that's a good thing to say. Valco. The question I get asked everybody I talk to, even today I was at Home Depot in San Jose, not the one near Cupertino, but the one down on Hillsdale Avenue, and someone asked me what's happening with Valco. I just cannot get away from it. So here's Valco in happier days. That parking lot is now an apartment complex 19,800. And what are the options at Valco? Well, there's several things that could happen. They submitted a specific plan, which is being referendum. 3 out of 4 referendums have been declared acceptable, so the city council could either rescind those ordinances and resolutions, they could call a special election, or they could put it on the ballot at the next regular election, 2020. The SB 35 plan could be built. It's facing some court challenges. We don't know what's happening yet. Or what many of us hope is that the landowner will submit a new specific plan. So how can anyone be against housing? This is the hills of Valco. Well, this is why. These are the housing deficits. And the square feet of office, the retail, the hotels, and the number of housing units, and what the deficit would be depending on how many square feet per employee you think there are. These go from 150 to 300. So it's a huge deficit. So why should we be anxious to create a further housing deficit? It just doesn't make sense. We should have balance. And then there's school impact, rent, and so I ran numbers on school impact. They're waving the time at me, so I'll finish. So it varies. And what the company that did the report, they didn't include all the relevant data. What they did say is, oh, don't worry, the kind of housing going in at Valco, people with kids won't want to live there. So the housing will be the school impact will be very low. But the reality is, I mean, based on past housing developments in the city, what they said, not accurate. So I ran my own numbers. And it's interesting because the SB 35 would have much less impact because the BMR units are all very small and people in BMR units tend not to leave. I'm not sure what that 5 means.
It means your time is up.
It's actually 10,
Oh.
10 now.
Okay,
It's 10
then I have 5 more minutes. Okay. All right, well, I'll finish up and just be aware of the false narratives that are continuously promulgated by those with a specific agenda and financial interests. And be careful about building beyond your infrastructure. Okay,
If you haven't noticed, we have some volunteers that are going to be collecting questions from you. If you've got any questions you'd like to ask the panelists after they're finished presenting, please raise your hand. You'll be given a note card. Our next speaker is Council Member Lydia Koo from Palo Alto.
Thank you, Ravi. Hello, everyone. My name is Lydia Koo. I'm a City of Palo Alto's council member, and I'm here representing myself. Me, and me. But I did want to say that I want to thank everybody here who has set this program up. It's very important to get to know what is happening in the city and what the state is doing, as well as all our legislators. So I'm waiting for my presentation to come up. I'm just speaking. Since I have the microphone, I'd like to make a call out to City of Palo Alto's Mayor Eric Filsef, who's here. If you'll stand up. I also want to say hello to Vice Mayor Leanne Chow, standing back here. And if there's any other officials I haven't called out yet, let me know. John?
I was already there.
Oh, there.
Darcy's here now, or was?
I think he's
You're on that, so why aren't
Got
you
it?
showing? Why won't you show the screen?
You need to play that.
It won't play off the.
Okay,
But you had it up on YouTube, but it won't play with internet through here? Try to project that from the internet. This is straight out.
know if we're locked.
Yeah, we were getting a video.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
Just double click that.
No, that's the presentation. But
Yeah, yeah, but
if you go to your browser, it should be.
Is this Libby's presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It did,
Yeah.
but we want to go to this YouTube link.
Does that, there's a dot in YouTube, is that supposed to be there?
Yes.
Okay.
It was here on the browser. You can't show the browser?
I don't know. I've never done that. Libby, you don't have your slides on the USB stick?
I do, but I guess that link is not willing to work.
The link doesn't work in the slideshow, but it does work by itself.
Oh,
If you put it
okay.
in the browser. That's what and he
Oh,
had it
okay.
because it started to play.
Oh, yeah.
It's really worth it, so.
Close the PowerPoint.
You could speak without my slides if I had to. I mean, if they could keep flexibility, just as a, do you want to consider that as an option if people who have dual space? Sure has to use the policy.
Go to the browser. So it's not on the screen, you gotta close the PowerPoint. Stop this for a second. There you go.
Let me close all the PowerPoints. You don't need them. That's nice, but it's not showing the screen.
Don't worry.
You have to click PowerPoint.
Thank you.
No.
All right, there.
Okay.
You didn't have it. Slideshow from beginning. There we go.
Do the slide, forget the movie.
So it looks like we're not going to do the video, which actually I wanted to show the reason why I am where I am as a council member. And it was because of a development, a 75-unit development that was going into a neighborhood on a very small street, narrow, substandard street with no sidewalks. And it's a bicycle boulevard. It's a safe route to schools. And what happened was that the city council approved it. And that was the Maybell project that people talks about. And it did have low-income units there, about 60 units, but also they wanted to have 15 single-family homes in there, which would really seriously put the kids who are riding their bicycles and people who are walking to school in the mornings. And there's 3 to 4 schools that uses that path. So that's why I decided to run, because obviously there's nobody listening and nobody caring about the danger that it poses. This picture that I'm showing here, it shows what could happen in our city where you have smaller homes that are going to be impacted and they're completely in the dark. There's no more sunlight there with a tall building to this extent. And while a lot of the, while they're talking about it, the height limit can go to 45 or 55, when you add the density bonuses and all the other shenanigans that is in this legislation, it can go up to 85 feet. So we have to be careful where they write certain things and then they hide other in small print where you won't be able to see it. Oops. So each city is unique. This is the point. Each city is unique. We have San Francisco, it's unique in its own way. We have Palo Alto, unique in its own way. Cupertino, unique in its own way too. And San Luis Obispo, we have Portola Valley, we have Oakland Hills. Portola Valley and Los Altos Hills prefer not to have their homes showing on the hillside. So oftentimes their zoning laws dictate that it has to blend into the hillside with trees and so forth. Oakland Hills prefers to do it that way, where they can be seen on 880 and so forth. But that's their choice. So how has Palo Alto addressed our, the issues about our imbalance? And I admit Palo Alto does have an imbalance. As Stephen had shown, we're 3 to 1 in our jobs housing imbalance. That is also something from our previous council that has a hand in that too. And so we're grappling with all of this. But what the city has done is that we went into addressing the root of the problem. The root of the problem is that we reduced, a citizen initiative came forward and we adopted it, reducing our annual office cap to $50,000 per year. But also we amended our comprehensive plan to say that to the year 2030, we will not have over 850,000 square feet. So we're addressing the root of the problem in order to give an opportunity for us to delve into housing. And we have also taken a stab at investing in affordable housing, truly below market rate housing. This is subsidized housing, not just saying let's throw out all market, any type of housing. Trickle down economics does not work in housing. So we've invested 15 million of the city funds for a mobile home park where they were going to close it down. We have also invested 10 million into Wilton Court, which is a 30% to 60% area median income. So there's going to be units for disabled kids, for disabled persons, and also for low income. Then also Supervisor Joe Simidian has also brought forth a county parcel where they're going to be focusing on building for teachers, and the city has invested another 3 million in there. Now, while we have also a council majority that is more or less for pro-development, they've also gone ahead and done changes to our zoning laws. However, when we're doing that, we also have to be reminded that we still have to keep a balance, because when we deregulate completely, what happens is that we might find that we are now causing other issues such as parking, over-enrollment in schools, and our infrastructure. But in any case, our city has decided to accelerate the supply for housing, and so our ADU ordinance has gone even beyond what the state wants. And we have a housing ordinance that has increases in its floor area ratio and density, and within its existing envelopes. But it also has reduced parking. So, you know, these are dense buildings that are going to have less parking. And mostly it has eliminated site and design review. So now it just goes forward, whether it's compatible to your neighborhood, to a next door house or building, it doesn't matter. So we're going to have dense boxes in neighborhoods, and you know, the city's character is going to be gone. We also approved 100% a project that is 100% affordable. So what we need to understand is, what is the definition of affordable? The affordable word is being just thrown around left and right, you know, but when you look at it, our City of Palo Alto Municipal Code defines affordable as income up to 120% AMI. And I took a small subset of Santa Clara's AMI, and you can see for one person at a moderate income is 105,000. So this project that is going to be coming forward, that is 100% affordable, do you think they're going to build anything under 60% AMI, or are they going to be building between 100 and 120% AMI? I'm not going to answer that. And unfortunately, we weren't able to save the 75-unit hotel president apartments for the tenants due to the Ellis Act. So under the Ellis Act, the owner is able to get out of the rental business. And this apartment building actually had rents that people could afford. Yes, it was not subsidized, but it was something that people could afford. But now, the owner is trying to turn the building back to a hotel, which is going to be high-end luxury. So, to finish up, what we have is not a housing crisis. What we have is a crisis of legislators who do not relate with their constituents anymore. And I'll end with just a quote from Franklin Roosevelt. The liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerated the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than the democratic state itself. That in its essence is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual, by a group, or any controlling private power. And that's my end. Thank you.
Our final speaker is the Vice Mayor of Pleasanton, Julie Testa.
Oh gosh, I just got elevated. Hi, I'm Julie Testa, Pleasanton City Council member, not Vice Mayor, but maybe someday.
Sorry.
That's okay. And I am speaking as an individual. I'm going to go ahead and start because my slides loosely follow my presentation anyway, and to save time. So first, what I wanted to start with is that I fully support my city's 20% inclusionary housing ordinance. We strive to support our vulnerable populations. Our low-income housing is income qualified. Lydia's slides did a really good job of helping explain that, because it's important to understand when people say we're building affordable housing. I've had a lot of people come to me and say, but I went and I can't afford it, or I can't qualify for it. And so our 20%, and we're proud of 20%, that's a good amount. Every project that comes forward has to have the 20% inclusionary housing, but it is income qualified housing. And because that income qualified housing is subsidized, oh, there it is, by the other 80%, the 80% becomes higher market rate. There's really none of the in-between the starter workforce housing. the very low income qualified or the higher market rate. So the narrative that suggests that we're going to build all of these high numbers of affordable units, it's not happening, and it's not going to happen. And it's not because people wouldn't like to. It's because the factors that control it are economic factors. It's created the Bay Area economic success. We've already heard talk about that. Land values, labor costs, building materials are the factors that have driven up housing costs. I want my millennial children to be able to own houses in California also. It hurts me that they're talking about having to move out of state as my first grandchild is being expected. But what the legislative pieces that are coming forward are doing aren't going to accomplish that. So let's see. Many housing advocates, homeless advocates, and affordable housing advocates agree. These housing bills like SB 50 are real estate bills to serve developers. They will not solve California's affordability problem. So, let's see, I want to go back to that other one. Is that this? Oh, there it is. Okay, thank you. So what I wanted to share is something that I don't think that is being discussed enough. I'm concerned about many aspects of the state housing agenda. Loss of current affordable neighborhoods, as well as housing structures that are out of scale. We saw some of those slides. Changing the character of our neighborhoods and historic downtowns. Pleasanton has a beautiful, come visit sometime. We have lunch in our downtown. That's our sign that sits over our historic downtown. And what you saw in some of the other slides, we're at risk of that. Our lovely 1- and 2-story historic downtown with our old buildings could, because we're on, we have 2 BART stations, we have an ACE train station, we have a bus line, quality schools, all job-rich community. Our entire community is at risk with this legislation. But what I wanted to share was that the legislators are actually talking about, and there was a little bit of discussion about that, but if the next slide, there are many bills that are coming forward. They're talking behind the scenes about removing our mitigation fees. We need to be aware of this. We need to be paying attention, because what that'll do is the fees that we currently, that aren't enough already to build new schools, or to build our roads, or freeway infrastructure mitigations. They actually, the legislation, there's many of them that these are just kind of like getting their feet wet on it, but I've been in the rooms where they've actually talked about how they need to give a clear path to developers, wealthy developers, give a clear path by removing developer fees to make it easier to build. You heard how developers are saying that they can't pencil out, and so they're not building. So the suggestion is that all of those fees that they no longer would have to pay, that just build, baby, build. Well, what's going to happen? How do we then meet our infrastructure needs in our communities? Let's see the next slide. Okay, so the governor says that we need 2.5 million new housing units in 10 years. How many new schools is that? Where's the funding going to come from? How much more traffic does that create, and who will pay for those road improvements? Especially if at the same time they want to remove the mitigation fees that we've depended on in the past. So the answer is you will pay that. If you look at many of the bills, next one, the bills that are being created are to make it easier to pass those bonds. So we're going to no longer, we used to say new development should pay its own way, but we're going to remove those mitigation fees so the developments no longer pay those. And so we have to figure out how are we going to meet those infrastructure needs. This legislation is setting up, making it easier. instead of 2/3 majority on passing bills. Right now, ACA 1 is already on the table. It hasn't passed, but it's on the table, where they will reduce from a 2/3 majority to a simpler 55% majority. That it makes a huge difference in being able to pass those bills. And the other bills are starting the process. Nothing is actually on the table that, other than on the accessory dwelling units. It actually says no mitigation fees, and I those are smaller and lesser and not as much of a concern. But really what it comes down to is this responsibility. The financial burden will be removed from the big business, developers, special real estate, big tech, putting the financial burden on cities and homeowners. These bills will not produce significant quantities of affordable housing, workforce housing, or solve the California affordability problem. Tell your legislators to distribute job centers to housing-rich areas. There was a little discussion about that earlier. Less congested parts of the state. Oh, next one. Let's see, last. There we go. To require large employers to use some of their record profits to pay to offset the housing problem they create, not us. Ask your legislators, who do they serve?
I want to thank all of you for your incredibly informative presentations. Now we're going to begin a panel discussion. I have some questions that I wanted to ensure get asked because there are a lot of bills in addition to SB 50 that are quite relevant when it comes to land use and zoning in municipalities. At the same time, we've gotten a lot of questions. Please keep them coming. I'm going to do my best to try and synthesize them, and please keep an eye out. I'll make sure that your questions are heard. One thing I wanted to start off with is SB 330, which was proposed by Senator Skinner, and it would prohibit on land where housing is an allowable use, cities, counties, and even voters themselves, through initiatives or referendums, from making amendments to a general plan or zoning ordinance that would reduce the intensity of land use from what was allowed under the January 1st, 2018 general plan. And it would also impose design standards it would also prohibit design standards that are more costly than what's currently on the books this year, January 1st in 2019. It does place additional restrictions, but what I find interesting is that all of this applies retroactively. We're 3 months past January 1st this year, and we're 15 months past January 1st in 2018. So I'd like to get a better understanding. What do you think is the intent of this bill, and how is it going to affect all of our cities? So yeah, this goes for anyone who wants to answer the question.
So is this on? Let's see.
Michael?
Press mute.
Press mute.
Okay, turn the projector on.
I'll take a stab at it. There's a bunch of stuff in 330, which, and say, one thing that, a couple of things bother me. Oh, by the way, I have to say, while I am speaking, while I am a member of the Sunnyvale City Council, I'm speaking solely for myself. Got that out of the way. I really want to have more environmentally sustainable housing. And to do that, we need to change the requirements. We need to stop natural gas going to housing, so we have fully electric houses. Believe it or not, housing is more of a contribution to greenhouse gases than cars. And this would prohibit that. It's already hard enough as it is. Builders do not want to do anything different than they're already doing. They just don't want to take the risk. The other thing is we'd like to require more solar panels, that kind of stuff. on buildings above 3 stories. This would prohibit that. There's other considerations. We can't ask for, we're currently at about, I think 12.5% BMR requirements. We would not be able to change that to 15 or 20%, which 20, Berkeley uses 20, San Francisco uses 18.5. I'd love to get to at least 15, but we would not be able to do that. So it would negatively affect housing. It would negatively affect our chance to get to net zero housing bill. And that's the things that hit me. Anything else? Anybody?
Do you want to keep moving?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'll-
Will you probably all of it's comment on everything? but
Sure.
you just
I
continue.
think if I might just say something about 330. 330 also limits a community's right and democratic right to referendum.
That's the big.
That's the big part about it. And as you have seen, we've been going through referendums because of poor legislation. So this actually takes away our democratic right in order to voice opposition to something that the legislators have done.
I'm going to summarize a bunch of cards that are quite similar. They're asking, what specific steps can residents take to pressure state officials? And if there are any resources that individuals can be connected with, particularly SB 50, as well as how can we hold our county supervisors better accountable? And we're probably going to try and stick to about 5 to 6 minutes for each of these questions.
So, I'll jump in to start with a question to what to do. At the back of the room, there's a handout called Act Now. And so it gives you some of those specific things that you can do in terms of, what are the steps you can take. So just to summarize a couple of things, like these are all gonna sound really familiar. They sound kind of like, are these really gonna make a difference? But yes, we have reason to believe they make a difference. And that is that you make calls. So this sheet includes the calls that you can make and the timing of Senate Bill 50. Let me just say, here's a bit of timeline things. Is on April 10th, Senate Bill 330 that we just talked about is going to be at the Senate Governance and Finance Committee. So making calls about that first is going to be really important, and that sheet includes the phone numbers for Governance and Finance. And to say when you make these calls, really it is enough for you to call to say, I'm calling about Senate Bill 330 and I'm opposed. Or I'm calling about Senate Bill 50 and I'm opposed. That a lot of what happens in these offices is that they're not interested in great debate, but just who's calling in and how momentum is building. Also on April 10th, the bill AB 1487 that was listed here, the creating a regional housing body, is going to be heard. April 17th is the deadline date to email comments regarding Senate Bill 50, and then on April 24th is when Senate Bill 50 will be heard. So pick up that sheet. It gives you the phone numbers, it gives you email addresses, it gives you a bit of the timing of the whole thing. And if you go to the Livable California website, you can find resources that will give you links to names of assembly senators and ways to track the legislation.
And additionally, you can go to Sacramento and you can go to the offices of all these legislators. You probably won't talk to them, you'll talk to their staffs. I was there about 2 weeks ago, and it was very interesting on SB 50, because probably, I would say 75% of the people I talked to, including several of the actual legislators, came out. They expressed a lot of concern with SB 50 and how it would actually not contribute to more affordable housing. But just because it wouldn't work does not mean they won't support it. There's a culture there that if they don't support their colleagues' bills, their colleagues won't support their own bills. So a lot of them will support a bill even though they think it's not great. We talked to one Republican legislator who's a co-sponsor. He said, if I wasn't there as a co-sponsor, I would have no input in trying to take out the worst parts of this bill. So my feeling is at this point, even though 827 failed last year because all these affordable housing and environmental groups came out against it, and SB 50 is essentially the reincarnation of SB 827, I mean, it does have a good chance of passing. We should just try to take out the worst parts. Thank you.
If I could join in. One thing we heard from the lobbyists that we have is that they don't get much mail. So if they get 100 letters, that's a lot. So just sit down, remember how to lick a stamp and put it on? Yeah, it's a lost art now. They got 100 letters, they say, oh my God, that's huge opposition. They're not seeing the opposition this time that they did from 827. So we need to, show them they're wrong. I think what's happening is people like me are getting sick of this and just saying, fine, do your worst, I'm out of here. If this thing passes. Thanks.
Can I just, I'm in no way ready to say, just go ahead. And myself and Susan, in fact, were Tuesday at the hearing on Senate Bill 50. And it was disheartening because we were also there a year ago for 827, and it was very different. So they are feeling very comfortable with an enormous amount of support, and they're not. We know the majority. We know if it went to a vote of the people, it would not pass. But they don't have to hear us when they're there. And so when only a few of us show up, we need those emails, we need those letters, we need to have people from different districts in different cities. That's why I'm here today, because we do need to all join together, because if it isn't a united voice, they have those special interest groups that are lining up.
Okay, so may I come in with one thing too? Just to say, don't forget the importance of your own assembly member and senator, and letting them know that you vote, that you pay attention and you vote. Just to say, last November when, in Cupertino, you had an amazing election here that caught a lot of people's attention because incumbents were ousted, and the challengers who were talking about the importance of sustainable growth or having other languages than build, build, build were the people who won, and that happened in Los Altos and Mountain View, and people are paying attention. So if you call, I think most of you, you're represented by Jim Bell and Evan Lowe, make those calls to them, even though they're not on the committees. Let them know you want them to be walking the hallway saying your constituency is not happy with whatever the bills are you want to focus on.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question now from my sheet about AB 68 and 69, which involve accessory dwelling units, ADUs. As a brief summary, they're prohibiting certain ordinances that impose requirements on minimum lot size. It's really difficult to summarize lengthy bills concisely. So the other bill is requiring the local agency to submit the ADU's ordinance to the Department of Housing and Community Development within 60 days. The important distinction is that the burden of proof is going to be placed on the local agency and not the developer. So my question is what's the most profitable way individuals are going to be able to take advantage of these two bills, and what types of changes might we see in the Silicon Valley region particularly?
Okay, I'll start. One big concern I have with ADUs, besides the effort to exempt them from fees, that they will, an ADU will have impact on parks and schools. But the biggest issue is the ADU going to be rented out as long-term affordable housing, or is it going to be rented out as a short-term rental unit? If you're spending $120,000 to $150,000 building an ADU in your backyard, you are probably going to be renting it out for $200 to $300 a night as a short-term rental, because you have to pay for it. So I'm very concerned that we're going to end up with a lot of short-term rentals, but not a lot of affordable housing, and I'm not sure what the solution is to that.
I'll chime in. One of the things on the ADUs is it will, in Sunnyvale, you have to live in one of the units. If you have an ADU in your backyard, you have to live either in the main house or in the ADU, but you can't just be an absentee landlord. These bills would get rid of that, And so I can easily see investors from around the world, New York, Moscow, Shanghai, saying, oh great, I can get some, buy property there and just never even see it and rent it out. And so we've become even more and more a rental-based community. And people who are renting typically rent for about 2 years, and they don't have a big investment in the community because they know they're not going to be there that long. Sometimes they don't even change their voting registration. The other thing is that you can, one of these bills, I can't keep them straight, is allows you to split off one. So you have you sell your house, someone from Moscow buys it, it's a safe deposit box as far as he's concerned, puts an ADU in the backyard, and then can split that property into 2 properties. Then they can split that new property with the ADU on it, has enough land for another ADU, they can split it again and sell it off. And you have a lot of little things. No parking is, extra parking is required. We're all supposed to take the bus and walk. So there you go.
So if I might briefly also add, AB 68, which is also the ADU, still talking about the topic, the bill would prohibit any ordinance from imposing requirements on minimum lot size, lot coverage, or floor area ratio, and would prohibit an ordinance for establishing size requirements for accessory dwelling units that do not permit at least an 800 square feet unit of at least 16 feet in height to be constructed. So they're just bypassing everything, and the next day you'd have in your backyard, probably at the fence boundary line, a 16-foot high, over 800 square feet dwelling unit. So that's one, and then the other one, AB 69, requires the housing and community development to report if you're not following the ordinance, and report it to the Attorney General. So then now it puts the responsibility on the city to defend itself. So it's a tattletale, you know, and they're using the housing and community development to do that. So this is, again, very much top down. Takes away any control from local cities.
Okay, I've got a lot of great questions from the audience. I'm going to try and get to every single one of them. I'm going to combine some of these questions. One is, what specific steps can we take to pressure state officials to listen to residents about SB 50, as well as a question from Angela from Los Gatos. I don't see that they are offering affordable housing. How are they helping or not? And there are 2 other questions that are pertaining, I think. I'm going to summarize this and say, what are some alternatives or solutions to the legislation that's been proposed when it comes to affordable housing or incentivizing affordable housing?
Okay. Yeah, it is about affordable. Sorry, it is about affordable housing, but this is a basic law of economics going back to ancient Babylon. If you increase the density, you increase the cost. If it were otherwise, Lower Manhattan would be the cheapest place in the world, followed by Hong Kong. At the moment, the Lower Manhattan is the most expensive real estate in the world, just exceeding Hong Kong. And if you look at Hong Kong, it's dense. It's not cheap. It's half the people that live there live in subsidized housing, or otherwise they couldn't live there. So everything that increases the density increases the cost. What you need is, if you're going to become like New York, you need a New York transportation system. You need subways and elevated, and you need a lot more ways to get in and out. One of the problems getting from Sunnyvale to Mountain View is there aren't that many roads. It's about we're all a bunch of cul-de-sacs and streets that go nowhere, like I live on. You just can't get there. I will say over and over and over and over, you can build as high and as dense as you want. You have to get people in and out, and we can't do that in our city.
Yeah, and I would add to that. When you look at New York, the general area, there are a lot of people that want single-family homes. They live out on Long Island or Staten Island. from Long Island. They take the Long Island Railroad into Manhattan. It's an electrified, fairly fast railroad. You have people commuting from Connecticut, on the ferry from Staten Island, and on the PATH trains from New Jersey. It's all designed so people can live where they want to live, where they can afford it. Now here, it would be wonderful if we had, besides the ACE train that goes out to the Stockton and Tracy and Lathrop, if we had some kind of fast transit so people could live where they want to live. If you saw the article a few years ago or 2 years ago about a Red Lobster employee in San Jose who was living in Stockton because that's where she can afford a house. And yeah, hey, you feel bad, but she said, I didn't want to live in an apartment in San Jose. I wanted a house, and this is where I had to go to get it. And yet there's no good way for her to get from Stockton to San Jose in a reasonable amount of time other than driving.
So I'll chime in with a comment too, just referring back to Michael's slide showing how affordability on housing really depends on how much money you have. So that there are those people who affordable will be like $5 or $6 or $10 million, and that's not going to be an issue. What many of us are really concerned about is what are those people doing who are happy that finally we have a minimum wage at $15 an hour, but that translates into $30,000 a year, and how is it that those people are going to find a place to live knowing that the owner of their building is also likely to pass along the way sewer rates are going up, water rates are going up, electric rates are going up, so that all of those kinds of pass-through expenses are likely to be added on, and or that the transportation agencies are always increasing tolls on bridges, so some of the most regressive taxes are also hitting very hard those people who are the most vulnerable. So the kinds of legislation that we're seeing now is really such an attack on those people who are extremely vulnerable, and then it is the attack on the rest of us who might have a bit of the American dream by the fact that we own some of land. Used to be gold was the great thing that people were rushing to get. Now, what corporate America is rushing to get is more of the land ownership. So the same way farming went into becoming corporate farming, our middle class is going to be squeezed out if these bills pass by the fact that the ownership of that land will go into the hands of fewer and fewer people. That 1% that we heard about during the Occupy movement, that's a part of why this crisis is just a great concern to me and colleagues, that it is the way in which that middle is disappearing, and we have then a very, very rich 1% and a very, very poor group of vulnerable population.
I also want to add that we have to be purposeful. As cities, we need to be purposeful about ensuring that subsidized housing below market rate is actually built. And one of the ways to do it is to actually start thinking for those cities that do not have business taxes, that they should start taxing the big business, and that money can be put aside to go towards affordable housing, because developers, market rate developers are not going to build affordable housing, subsidized housing. They're going to build market rate, because at the end of the day, it's about their rate of return. What are they going to make? So cities have to be purposeful about doing that. And additionally, the state gives away so much tax incentives in order to encourage development. And most of that, where it's lucrative, is office and R&D, research and development. So again, we're fighting big business as well as legislators. And these are people that we probably elected, right? Now, in addition to that, I just do not want to pass this opportunity of letting you know, the federal government also has provided tax breaks that are meant to spur investment in low-income areas, supposedly to boost California's economy. And these opportunity zones, there's going to be one in San Jose in the Alum Rock area. There's one in Menlo Park. There's one in Redwood City. But they're supposed to be spurring. They're gonna kind of come in and redevelop these low-income areas so that it will look nicer. But at the end of the day, even though they're allowed to build housing, do you really think they're gonna build subsidized housing, or is it gonna be market rate? And if they do, it's gonna be a measly 15%, 10%, where the office space is gonna be in the millions. So one of the things that you can do is remember, election matters. And in 2020, we have an election. Some of these people, some of these legislators needs to be voted out, and you need to be attentive to that. Thank you.
Referred to as a housing project, despite deeply worsening the housing shortage. Are housing developments in ACA 1 really mixed use projects? How do you know?
No. No. Thank you. No, seriously. You're absolutely right about what happened at that big shopping center. I do have to say, the SB 35 project, the big issue with it to me was that the affordable units were all very small. I think it was an average of around 350 square feet, and the market rate units would be luxury housing essentially. However, the great thing about it is I don't believe there was any way to get out of actually building those affordable units. And that is different than a lot of these projects where the development agreement will say, okay, we're going to try to get federal funding for this affordable housing, and if we can't get it, we don't have to build it. We'll just give you the in lieu fees instead and be out of there. I know I'm not directly answering that question, but it is true that there's mixed-use projects masquerading as housing projects that will worsen both the jobs housing imbalance and worsen the affordable housing availability. So we should be aware of those kind of things. And as to lowering the threshold for passing bond measures, yeah, I don't know. I probably would not be in favor of that personally. Although I do see the reason that that's being put forward, of course. You know, it would be difficult to pass a 2/3 bond measure. Although you need 2/3 bond measures for a lot of city things. I know in Cupertino we're trying to raise money for things, and it's like, you need 2/3, figure out how to get it, make it attractive enough that people vote for it.
I'm gonna chime in a little. This is about housing bills, but as I will say till I drop dead, housing is just a part of the puzzle. The other part is transit. One question is I hear all the time is, where will the teachers live? Where will the cleaning lady live? Well, the teachers can't afford to live on, who teach people in Lower Manhattan, cleaning ladies who clean the Wall Street offices. They can't afford to live there either, but it's not a problem because they get on the subway at Queens and they're there. They snooze, read a book, whatever. We don't have that. If we don't have the transit, the housing isn't going to work, period. But we have two choices really. We can become like LA, which is just such an awful mess, it's just not growing anymore. Or we can become like New York City and spend literally billions putting in a huge transit system. The problem we're facing is geography. That we have decided not to fill in the bay, thank God, or pave over the hills. And once you do that, you've lessened the land available, and everything else just raises the cost, period.
So for the detail about the ACA 1, here's a bit of what is I've got from the description of that. So the current constitution prohibits the ad valorem tax rate on real property from exceeding 1%. So a part of what this measure does is to create an additional exception to that 1%, assuming that they would be able to raise that percent on property taxes, and then lower the voter threshold to be able to have that vote on it. So, so that's part of the detail of that. Then just saying, I was just talking to a colleague the other night who was talking about, whether I'm paying attention to the bond market, which I wish I were, but I am not, but saying that there is a kind of flattening of the bond market. And for any of you who are experts in that, I'd love to hear more from you, maybe afterwards today. Just saying that the long-term rates are flattening so that the short-term, but you know what, I shouldn't even go further into this. It's confusing to me, but there is something about the bond market for us to be aware of as cities would be taking on added indebtedness with bonds for whatever they're doing.
Just to add on to that, there's no way to know whether that money is going to be coming back to that city, and how is it going to be coming to that city for affordable housing or to repair their infrastructure. So that's another layer that you're going to be taking on the debt, and you're not going to get any returns on it.
I'm gonna ask a personal question now. I am a millennial, and yeah, shocker, right? And homeownership's always been a really big part of entering the middle class. And I'm sure everyone here knows that it's a lot more difficult to buy a home these days. And I'm going to combine this with another question about younger workers in the area as well as around the country. What advice do you have for my generation?
Okay. So today in Campbell, a rental townhouse that I've owned since 1984, I've had tenants in there for 10 years. They're paying an amazingly low rent because I only raised it $100 in 10 years. And they told me a month ago, oh, we're leaving. We bought a house in Rockland, and they're moving out today. He works for Apple. She stays at home. And they said, we want a house with a yard for our kids. And they're millennials. And I said, yeah, I understand that. And someone else is moving into the unit next week, and yeah, they will not be paying that super low rent because I was kind of subsidizing the previous people just because I don't want to deal with any problem tenants. Anyway, it may be that you have to go to a place where single family homes are affordable. I kind of liked the ballot measure that failed last November that would have allowed people to take their Prop 13 valuation to anywhere in the state, because I thought it would have freed up a lot of housing in areas like Silicon Valley where people say, well, I can't afford to move, but I'm willing to move, and then there'd be more housing for millennials, but that did not pass, unfortunately, in my view. So that's one piece of advice. You're gonna have to look to where housing is affordable until we get people that don't really need all these single family homes to eventually move. But they will pass it on to their kids who will get the Prop 13 valuation, which I think is not fair.
I'd like to finish that off. Millennials, I was a millennial, I was young once, and I wanted a single family house, and it never occurred to me, it simply did not enter my brain that I should have some right to buy it anywhere I want. Because if I could, I would have chosen Lower Manhattan. I kind of like the place. I started grade school there. But it's out of my reach, and I just said, okay, well, that's out of my reach. So my mom was a single mom, and she moved us to the suburbs in Long Island, which is very nice. And the idea that, honestly, I have to say, it comes across as entitlement that I, as a millennial, gets to live anywhere they want. If that were true, I would choose the Champs-Élysées, please. Or Mayfair in London, that's a really nice place. In Mayfair in London, you can get a very nice townhouse, looks great, about 3 stories, brick, nothing special. It's only $7-8 million. And in New York's and Manhattan, you can get a very nice single family house, the few left. Brownstone, 4 stories, top floor for the live-in nanny. It's only $12 million. People have been moving to the suburbs to afford what they want. The idea that somehow every place and every square inch in every place should be equally affordable to everyone is bizarre, and I'm not going to even dignify it. Thanks.
And if I can just add, when my husband and I got married, we identified where we wanted to raise our family, and we did have to work our way to different levels of property to finally be able to have that home in the neighborhood that we wanted and with backyard. But our first property was a result of a first home buyer program. In Pleasanton, we are reviewing our first home buyer program. I do think that that's important. And I do think that, that we need to have programs and opportunity to help people out. It doesn't mean a gift. For ours, it was, we got help with the down payment. And, you know, it was very modest, but we worked our way into being able to raise our family where we wanted to. So I guess as an elected official, I feel that that's my responsibility to try and help and find programs that can help people as well.
Okay, we've got a couple questions pertaining to the environment and CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. Okay, there's one on SB4 in context of, does this bill, to an extent, why is this bill proposing, sorry, I'm stumbling a bit here. Why is this proposed bill appearing to allow streamlining of hazardous waste sites? And there's another question about the environment in general. I was wondering if you just comment on CEQA and how these bills relate to it.
So let me disclose that I am a Democrat, progressive Democrat, longtime Sierra Club member, and it's just shocking to me that all of a sudden the California Environmental Quality Act is seen as something that is terrible and need to be gotten around and ignored. Now, I heard the mayor of Los Angeles speak a few weeks ago in San Jose, and it was like, this is great, we're gonna bypass CEQA. And to me, it just seems awful. Yes, CEQA can be burdensome to me, but I think it's just so important that we look at, that we take a systems view and consider the environment when we're doing these things. And allowing building on hazardous waste sites, streamlining that just seems like a terrible idea to me.
If we go back to the Sustainable Communities Act that was a part of what grew out of Plan Bay area a number of years ago, there were 3 E's that were considered in that. They were economy, equity, and the environment. It feels as if we've taken a great leap and put a whole lot of weight on economy and the economic factors that people are looking at without paying enough to either equity or the environment. And CEQA, the weakening of CEQA is one of the ways in which that's been played out.
I'd like to indirectly address this. I think it's important to understand none of this is what it seems like. I mean, none of it. It says it's for housing, but what it really is for builders. Builders continually come up and say, I can't get the land. That is the continual complaint. I rezoned El Camino, which is already a traffic mess. Rezoned it for 4 or 5 story apartments or condos or whatever. And I asked the builder, well, why aren't you building there? He said, well, we can't buy the land. All these little strip malls and stuff require 17 signatures or something, and Aunt Matilda's just not gonna sign because she likes the income. So they're desperate for land, and they'll take what they can get. And so anything that gets in the way has gotta go. It takes $2 million to be elected senator, state senator. It takes $1 million to be elected assembly member. Where does that money come from? Well, it doesn't come out of my back pocket. It comes out of builders, construction unions, and so they call the shots. And that has got to be understood as the motivating factor. It is not any sympathy for the poor millennials who can't afford to house by a colonial Victorian in San Francisco.
Okay, looks like we've got about just less than 5 minutes left, so we're gonna have one last question, really brief answers. And okay, there's 2 questions that are addressed personally to individuals on the panel. I'm just gonna hand this to them because I don't think we'll have time to just even read all of them. I'm gonna ask this last one. What are some ways to combat money in politics and better influence our state legislators? And then there's other questions, how this ties into long existing laws.
Okay, that is
the thing. Sorry, that is the question of the day. They screwed up. they only outspent me 6-1, my opponent, and so I actually won. They didn't make that mistake in the next election, and my friends and allies who were hoping to join me were outspent 12-1. So this is pocket change for them. One of these developers has a multi-billionaire. He has a 185-foot yacht. I looked it up. It costs him $100,000 a month just to staff it, even if he doesn't walk and get on it. So for them, this is nothing. $1 million, spread around all the city councils, that's nothing. So that is the one thing we have to do, because it is about the bucks, period. One beginning, middle, and end. I want to say one more thing about that. The cities that signed up for this, mayors, because the city councils have not, are desperate. They cannot pay their bills. San Francisco has a budget of, forgetting the airport and Muni, of $5 billion. They have to borrow to about $100 million to pay it. And these are good economic times. They are bursting at the seams with new buildings. San Jose is just as bad. They had to cut their budget because they had to borrow last year. They still have to borrow now. This is all pensions and just mismanagement and all this good stuff. The next recession, there's going to be a wave of bankruptcies, and flip a coin whether San Jose or LA goes first. But they are desperate to get the building in because they want by right to just not have to deal with anybody, CEQA or housing advocates, just bulldoze all the low-income place, put up high-rise apartments, and get the new tax money.
So yeah, I would also point out, if anyone paid attention to Mountain View recently, there have been 3 approvals to tear down apartment complexes with rent-controlled housing and build market-rate for sale housing, which is allowed under the Ellis Act. The city council has no authority to stop it because the property owners are not asking for density bonuses or any changes. And of course, the city must think it's great because their property tax is going to go up. They're going to get parcel taxes from each individual parcel instead of one from a huge number of units on a parcel. And people say, oh, why is the city council allowing this? Well, they had no choice, and they probably like it because they're getting more revenue.
Just for the issue of how to get money out of politics, I think you had a great, I referred to this before, where we have the great example in November, those candidates who won being far outspent by the people who are supporting a rapid growth agenda. I mean, in this room, I can look around and see people who won going door to door, having coffees, doing a really intensive outreach effort to make sure the story is getting out and being told. So I think that's one of the main things for how do we get all the money out of it, is go door to door and develop the connections and the relationships with the story that people, when they know, they don't like what's going on.
Everyone, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming here, making this event possible. Thank you to everyone who wrote questions down so carefully. And okay, I'm going to give the mic over to Mooney.
Before you close, I want to say one thing about money in politics. I'm Lady Enander of Los Altos City Council, but speaking for myself. And that is, and I've had legislators tell me this very directly, there are only 2 things that matter to legislators: the money on which they run, and votes. You represent the votes. If you vote against these folks, if you call your friends and neighbors who don't live in your same district, but who live in the districts that are on the list that Susan's provided on that sheet, call your friends that live in Riverside County, that live in Southern California, call your kids who've moved out of the area and live in Eureka or wherever they are, have them call their legislators and say, if you vote for this, I will vote against you in the next election. That is what they care about, and that is the power that everyone in this room has. Please use it.
Okay, in closing, so thank you all for coming, and apologize for some technical challenges. Our i5 projector didn't work, so we had to make do with a backup, so that worked out. I'd like to thank the distinguished panelists and also Rahul and the audience. And there are few items, just as a reminder. So if you go to Livable California website, if you type in your address, there's a link there. That tool tells you, what the SB 50 will do to your neighborhood, right? It will tell you, what kind of buildings, the developers can build right next to your home, right? So it's very important, go get an idea and, pass on that link, to others, the people that you know, right? So, and pick up the cheat sheet, on the table there that tells, what can you do to stop these bills becoming laws, right? So that's very important. And also subscribe to Livable California as well as Better Cupertino websites, because they hold these kind of informative sessions to keep us informed and educated so that we can act. As Anita Hernandez said, the vote is the most powerful tool that you have in your hands. They can spend how much ever they want, you can still beat them, and that's been sufficiently demonstrated in Cupertino, right? This outspent, in our council election 100 to 1, and we still, beat them, right? You can do it, every one of us, if you do it in our cities, the people that run for higher offices, will take note, right? That's pretty much it, yeah. So thank you all, enjoy your rest of your weekend.